the talk to start off with. It's called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And many of you who are my age will remember that film. And that fellow in the middle was the fellow who was the bad, Lee Van Cleef. And I thought that this is an appropriate title for what we're going to be talking about today. Just to say a little bit about myself, I used to be a doctor, and just before I retired, we had the opportunity to buy some land in Roscollon, which was fantastic. And the reason that I say that was when I was a medical student, I remember saying to my future mother-in-law that I wanted to be a farmer. And she, in no uncertain terms, told me to, well, I can't remember exactly, but she didn't. She was the sort of individual, she was a lovely person, but I never had a cross with her, but she didn't mince her words with what I thought of becoming becoming a farmer. She thought it was a daft idea. However, I managed, just before I retired, Diana and we managed to buy some land near us, which we called Gwaelenlli, which means a view of Bardsey Island in Welsh. And you can see Bardsey from bits of the land, and it's an island which is well worth visiting if any of you have. I go there several times a year if I can. I'm different to most farmers in the sense that being a retired doctor, I have a pension. So cost of running something isn't something you have to take necessarily into consideration. Having said that, the land on which we bought when we bought it, it was derelict. There'd been a huge fire on it. The fire had burnt for about 3 or 4 days. The fire service was there, and really the land was wrecked. So it's had huge changes since we bought the land, which is almost 20 years ago now. Now then, I'm going to talk about organic versus conventional farming, which is really quite a divisive topic, and is certainly involved in the chemistry or the science of climate change. And the fact is that it doesn't matter what sort of farming you do, you pollute. Some types of farming cause more pollution than others. And if you keep animals, for instance, as I did, I've sold them about 3 months ago, they do cause pollution without a shadow of doubt. But we'll go into that in more detail further on. It has farming has a huge bearing on climate change and the chemistry of carbon and nitrogen. Now, the title's The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, but we're going to talk about things in reverse. We'll start with the ugly, go on to the bad, and then finish with the good. You can imagine as a doctor, when you go and see a doctor, doctors often have to tell you the bad news. But if they've got any sense, they'll try and give you some good news at the end to say there's a cure for the problem you've got or whatever. And it's something which I still do that now. I haven't changed my tune. So we're starting with the bad news, and then we'll try and finish with some of the good news. Well, first of all, to talk about fertilizers. Fertilizers are expensive. When you buy fertilizers, they either have nitrogen, phosphorus or potassium, and that's why they're called NPK fertilizers. But one of the main components of fertilizers are the urea and the salts of ammonia. And one of the things which I didn't know was how much energy is required to manufacture ammonia. Now, those of you who did chemistry, as I did a long, long time ago, know that there's a process called the Haber-Bosch process, which was invented in Germany, and that involves heating nitrogen and hydrogen at very high pressure at about 500 degrees centigrade in the presence of an iron catalyst. And the thing which I found which was so appalling was that uses 2% of the energy resources of world energy resources to manufacture this ammonia. And it contributes about 1.5% of world carbon dioxide. I remember going, when I was a young lad, to Schleswig-Holstein in northern Germany, and I stayed there with a family, and this is about 60 years ago. And these people were organic farmers. And as a young lad, 15, 16, I thought they were crackers. I really did think they were crackers. How wrong I was. They were years ahead of their time. And subsequently, when I became a medical student, I suppose you think about these things, and it may be then that I was thinking about being a farmer, which is something which I've done now, and I'm really pleased about it. Of course, we've had the wettest February since records began to, records was first started by a chap called Luke Howard in 1815, and this month has been the wettest for 200 years. Not only that, the amount of rain we've had is 30% more than what we should have on average in the month of February. I remember, again, just to put things into context, I remember we had an apple tree at home. By the way, I was born and brought up in Liverpool, and no farming background at all. My father had nothing to do with farming, nor did my mum. But I remember we had an apple tree in the garden. I remember giving this apple tree some chemicals. I'd be 11 or 12. I had a fantastic chemistry set. You name it, I could make it. And I remember giving this tree some chemicals, trace elements and what have you, and it ended up with apples. They're the biggest I had, they were that size. So as far as I was concerned, chemistry and chemicals was the way forward. How wrong I was again. So I want to talk about pesticides. So we've talked a little bit about chemicals. I'll just say, is there anything else I wanted to say about it first? I forgot to mention manure. Manure is something which is produced by cows, and you get methane from manure. It is the interesting thing about manure is that when you go to an organic farm and you look at manure, and you'll see lots of little holes in it, and those holes are due to birds pecking the manure to get the dung beetles out. If you go to a non-organic farm where they treat their cows with these chemicals called porons, which kill parasites and tapeworm and so forth, that affects the manure, and manure in these farms don't have holes in. So manure in an organic farm helps wildlife, whereas in the ones where they treat them with chemicals, they don't. If we could talk a little bit, mention a bit about, the other thing about manure, the other thing interesting is that one cow produces about 11 tons of manure a year. And I mentioned about porons. Now, glyphosate, many of you may well use this in your garden. The name for it is Roundup. And it's about the only pesticide which is in use in farms in the UK at the moment. There are others in development, mostly in the United States. But the problem about introducing this country is that they have to go through various hoops before they're allowed to be used. And so glyphosate, which was first made by Mayer and then has been taken over by Bosch. Sorry? Monsanto, yes, Monsanto. It was Monsanto, then taken over by Bosch, and they've had to face various lawyers have been getting at them because the risk of possible potential risk of cancer and or carcinogenity and genicity. The other problem with glyphosate is what they call microbiome disruption, and this is where you get disturbance of the bacteria in the bowel. In Europe, glyphosate is used, but it is very much restricted. The other big problem with glyphosate is that weeds are becoming resistant to it, and farmers and it's a science. You put glyphosate down at a certain time of year, and depending on what crop you've got, where you put it, whether they flower and so forth. I won't go into detail because I've never used the stuff. But the problem with it is that farmers sometimes either put too much glyphosate, and that ends up in the crop, or they don't put enough on, and then weeds regrow, and then they've got to retreat, and you get this resistance to glyphosate, which is becoming an increasing problem in Europe, but not yet in the UK. Now, how are they? Well, the way they tackle it, or the way in the future that it will be tackled, is what's called integrated weed management and non-chemical weed control, which is basically where you have a machine on the end of a tractor, and you've got a camera which recognizes the weeds, and then it'll zap it either with high voltage or with a laser or something like that. And that's how they are proposing, which is a good thing, really. But obviously, if you're driving through a field slowly with a tractor, you are emitting lots of carbon dioxide in the process. But that's the future. The chemicals which are being developed in the States are not, there's no prospect at the moment of them being, as far as I'm aware, unless anybody here knows differently. I should just mention the other thing about glyphosate, and that's on what they call, I mentioned carcinogenicity. Now, the other health risks which you can get in farming is, and I haven't got this, is use of chemicals. And by that, I mean growth hormone and the synthetic estrogens. Now, since Brexit, 1989, prior to 1989, synthetic estrogen was in use in the UK. So the result of this was that you get these hens or turkeys, which were massive things, and they were so huge, their legs wouldn't support them. And as a result of entry into the EU, or common market as it was then, 1989, these chemicals were stopped in the UK. The other chemical that was stopped was growth hormone. Growth hormone, you're familiar, that's released by the pituitary gland, and you get this pituitary, in the case of estrogen, pituitary, adrenal, and ovary axis, where in the body the levels are controlled. But in farming, they gave synthetic estrogens, and again, going back a long, long time, I would be about 12 or 13, and I was reading an article in Scientific American, and I tried to look it up and I couldn't find it. And this was about gynecomastia in American males due to overuse of estrogen. Now, gynecomastia are breasts, basically, or tits. And these men were eating chicken which had been dosed with estrogen. And either they hadn't, as far as I remember I'm going back over 60 years now, but I was appalled by what I read. And as a result of this, I didn't eat chicken for a very long time. But safe to say, chicken in this country now is, prior to 1989, estrogens were used, and now it's no longer used. So but it is still used. These synthetic estrogens are still used in the United States, and you're probably aware that the UK wanted to have a trade deal with Canada, and that trade deal fell through because the Canadians use growth hormone on their cows, which is not allowed either in the EU, and at the moment the UK has continued to use the rules laid down by the EU, which are going to be further revised again. So, but in the United States, they still use synthetic estrogens in their meat. So any of you jet setters who go over to the States, just make sure the meat you eat is properly cooked, and you'll end up with bits of anatomy that you didn't have previously if you're a bloke. The only thing they say in the States is that the level of estrogen is such a level that it doesn't cause any harm. And that was reviewed, I think, in 1922. There was further, but I'm not sure. But anyway, it's just a warning. There are various, there's the Journal of Pediatric Surgery, 2012, the Journal of Andrology, 2013, and the European Food Safety Authority, which report in 2015, all relate to this problem of estrogens in meat. To get the right, I'll get it right eventually, won't I? Right, greenhouse gases. These are gases which cause global warming. Now, the ones which affect us are, there's a lot more than that. If you look at the fluorinated hydrocarbons, you remember these were hydrocarbons which were used in fridges and things like this, and they're no longer manufactured. But the reason I put it in there is the half-life of these fluorinated hydrocarbons. They're so unreactive chemically that their half-life extends to thousands of years. Now, methane, nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide, they are the main ones which affect farming. And it doesn't matter what sort of farming you do, whether you're organic or non-organic, you're all affected by it. So if we go to methane, first of all, the way it works is that the molecule of methane, you get the land is warmed up by sunlight. So the land gets warm. If it gets warm, it emits infrared radiation. Infrared radiation will be at a lower frequency, or a longer wavelength, if you like, than the light which lands on the Earth. And this is beyond me, but basically the molecule of methane traps that heat from the Earth and bounces it back. And that is why methane warms the atmosphere. The relevant thing about it is that methane is a very potent greenhouse gas and is roughly 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide. If you look at methane over a 100-year period, it's 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide is another greenhouse gas, and that is released not only in conventional farming, but also in animal farming, in organic farming. And it's a greenhouse gas which is 270 times more warming than carbon dioxide. This is if you look at over a 100-year period. Now that sounds like bad news, what I've said. Well, there is some good news to that. First of all, the half-life of methane in the atmosphere is much shorter than the half-life of carbon dioxide. I think methane, it's something like a half-life of about 12 years or something, as far as I can remember. I don't remember. Nitrous oxide is a similar short one. I think that may be about 30 years, I think. Does anybody know what the half-life nitrous oxide is here? No? Oh, well, fine. We'll call it 30 then and 12. But there is actually something we can do about methane and nitrous oxide to some extent. Now, methane is comes out of cows or ruminants. They eat the grass and then they belch the methane out, or they poo on the grass and the methane is released in that. So how are you going to get a cow which is eating grass? Well, it's a difficult one. They think that there may be some genetic manipulation of the animals which they can indulge in. How effective that's going to be, I don't know. The other way you can do it is if you're a non-organic farmer, it may be that you can give them different feed to what you normally give them. The only way that you can get around reducing methane emissions is by ensuring that the animal puts on the maximum amount of weight in the shortest period of time. So if you're talking about genetic manipulation, what you need is an animal that grows as quickly as it can, and therefore over its lifetime will release less methane than it would if it were live on the land for a long time. But it's a difficult one to crack. Nitrous oxide, now this is produced by nitrate fertilizers and also to some extent by manure, cow manure. And what happens is that ammonia is made by the Haber-Bosch process. And I could scarcely believe when I read this, but 2% of the world's energy is used in the manufacture of ammonia. In other words, 1/50th of all the energy that we use on Earth is made in the manufacture of this substance. It needs to be used as a fertilizer, so it has to be combined with nitric acid, and that uses a different chemical process. It's called Ostwald process or something like that it's called. So you get the ammonia and the nitric acid combined to make ammonium nitrate. Or you may use the ammonia to make urea. Now, ammonium nitrate is also the other use for ammonium nitrate is as an explosive. So the sort of chemicals that you buy, you've got a sign for them. These, a 600 kilo bag of fertilizer costs about 450 pounds. And you might use a 600 kilo bag of fertilizer on about 4 or 5 acres. So it's expensive stuff. This ammonium nitrate, incidentally, was what the IRA were using in. Remember, there was a huge bomb in London, wasn't there? They had a lorry full of 10 tons of the stuff, which caused huge damage. So it is used in an explosive, but in fertilizer, it's in a very low amount, and it's either used or the nitrogen is either used in the form of urea or possibly another ammonium salt, like ammonium sulfate. Carbon dioxide, that lasts hundreds of years in the atmosphere. And as I said, methane lasts about 12 years. So there's not much you can do about carbon dioxide. Now, one of the things I just want to mention is you've seen farmers in London and in Wales going around with these tractors complaining. And what they're proposing in Wales is that farms, you have 10% of their land either as trees or in some form of thing where animals and wildlife can survive. In other words, not farming land as such for production of food. Sorry, love?
I thought it was 10% of each for Wales, or 10% in England.
As far as I'm aware, it's 10%. So if you've got a farm of 50 hectares, 5 hectares in Wales has to be used. Those are the proposals, as far as I'm aware, unless you're... But... No, it's not as much as that. It's 10%, or is it? 20%? All right. Oh, thank you very much.
That's why they're protesting.
Yep. And if you recall, I said I'm not a typical farmer because I have a pension. But I think that we should be doing something like that. We should be planting more trees. You look at Anglesey now, drive along the A55, and you look at these huge fields with one sort of grass, nothing in it. You know what they've been doing. They've been spraying it with something to kill off the weeds and so forth. There's no wildlife, there's no trees, and yet you only got to go down to Charter Bay and look at the beach there at low water, and you see the trees in the sand there. This is what Anglesey was like a very long time ago. It was covered in trees, and now we have very few trees. It's a difficult equation, and the other problem we have as well is that if we go from conventional farming to organic farming, and you want to produce the same amount of food, you need 25% more land. So organic farming, it may be the answer in some respects, but it does mean that food will be either more expensive or that it'll be restricted. But you've only got to go, I feel sorry for the farmers, and you go to Morrison's, the supermarket in Holyhead, and you see there on the vegetable counter, our prices are cheaper than Lidl's or Aldi. In other words, these supermarkets have got a race. It's a race to the bottom. So if you've got relatively small areas of land, you're not going to make huge profits on anything that you sell because of the competition between the supermarkets. That is something we need to look at. And organic produce is more likely to be more expensive than the conventional stuff as well, despite the high cost of fertilizers and so on and so forth, and insecticides. The other thing you need to look at is look at the labels on these things and look at all the fancy chemicals that they're spraying, the oranges and so forth, and all the stuff they fly from Kenya or from Morocco or Spain. That's a separate thing. I'm not going to go into that because this gentleman, Tim Spector, he's Professor of Genetic Epidemiology at King's College London, and he does a food podcast, Food for Life. Make a note of it because it's well worth listening to. He'll tell you about all these nasty chemicals in that, and which is it's well worth listening to. I'm not going down that. You need to be a real expert to go down that direction. Now, the land which we bought is called Gwaelenlli, which is a view of Bardsey. And it's an organic registered farm. And to become an organic registered farmer, you have to have... Sorry? Yeah. To become an organic registered farmer, you need to have regular inspections. You have to be a member either of the Soil Association or the Quality Welsh Foods. And And they come and see you every year, make sure you don't put any chemicals on it and check the animals and so on and so forth. It's it's a 33 acres, which is about 20 football pitches. And bear in mind that most farms, in the average or the mean size of a farm in Wales is about 80 football pitches. And what I was saying earlier about farmers protesting, it's very difficult if you've got such a small area of land. You're so dependent on things like the weather and so forth to produce crops. And these supermarkets are not giving you a good price. It's no wonder a lot of these farmers have 2 jobs. And certainly when I was working as a doctor, it was very common to see a farmer who, you know, learned a bit of plumbing or woodwork or bricklaying or whatever. It was a very common thing. So this is why I think, you know, I mean, you just wonder, you look at these expensive tractors they've got down in, I wonder, these small farmers, they can't afford big tractors. I haven't got a big tractor like that, I can tell you. I've got a tractor, but I think, anyway, I don't know. Now, just to describe Gwaelentli, it's a very rough. There had been a big fire on the land before we bought it. All the fences had been burnt down. There were only 2 trees standing on the land. The fire burned for 3 or 4 days. It was a mess. So that was our dog, Pero, who's long dead. He was a lovely dog. So what I did was start building walls and so on and so forth. And that's the same view. So that shows you the sort of thing you did. So you built stone walls and had oak gates and so forth. I can assure you that when I started this, I had muscles where I didn't have muscles before. I just tell you, I remember one of the jobs I had was I was the chairman of the local medical committee on Anglesey. And of course, what you do, you have to go and see, you know, see people and shake hands. And I shook hands with this bloke, and I crushed his hand. You know, and what happened? I'd been pulling ragwort out, and the previous week, every day, I pulled a ton of ragwort. I'm going to talk about ragwort in a minute. But obviously, my grip was so enormous. So I had to apologize. So now you can't do any work on land without having a good helper. And Diana there has been my, I wouldn't call her second in command, but the 2 of us, and we've been involved, both of us have been involved in the various projects we've done on the land. This one here shows us building a den, and these are some school children there, and they thoroughly enjoy this sort of thing. One of the things that we came across when we found the land was you looked at the deeds, and all the fields had names, and those names, one's called Cae Morfa, Cae Llaunder, Cae Chwaen, and Cae Torgoch. And these were the names of the fields from deeds which were dated 1913. Now these field names are going out of use. And the reason they're going out of use is that with farmers having a single farm payment, or what you call it, they use numbers. And so if you have a number, you don't use that. And the other thing is, you know, walls get knocked down. And what I did was I did the reverse. We put walls where they'd been knocked down. And the interesting thing about these, so Cae Morfa is, Cae is field in Welsh, and Morfa is a low-lying piece of land. And the other interesting thing is that when Diana and I bought the land, Cae Morfa was underwater because there'd been rain. It's only 2 meters above sea level. Can I just say, despite this record rain that we've had now, that field now is not flooded. Its elevation is just the same. It's still 2 meters above sea level, but it is no longer flooded. And I think that is what happens when you grow fields in a certain way. Cae Llaunder is the fullness. It's Cae Chwaen is a raised, windy area. Cae Torgoch is an interesting one because this was you translate that into red mantle. Why red mantle? And the reason is that field had sorrel in it, which turns red. So that was why it was called Cae Torgoch. This is this is my family. We put a telegraph pole up, and we've got a owl box in the top of that. But this, you do need help, definitely. This is another friend of my son's. That's Steve. Steve's an Irishman. You can tell the way he's handling that mallet, but he's strong. And there's me relaxing, smiling. And there's one of the ponds which I've got there, which we extended. This is a chap called Ken Kemp. He's a meteorologist. And one of the things we did was we built a pond in Cae Morfa, in this low-lying one. And the purpose of that was to encourage water voles, in which it has been successful. Now, in the UK, the water voles have a threat from the American mink, and their number has fallen by a huge amount. And building that pond has reversed that. We certainly have water voles there. And what Ken is doing is building a bridge. This is Meirig Evans, the vet. Some of you may recognize him. He's retired now. And you can see how we move cows, Welsh blacks. You don't beat them. Those cows, when I call them, they actually follow me, which is brilliant, So you've got several tons of cow following it, running around it. And, but one of the things I wanted to say about farming is a dangerous occupation. It is, after fishing, it's the second most dangerous occupation. And it was quite common to see farmers who came to see you in the surgery, and you'd have to have a chest x-ray or something on them, and you see they had fractured ribs or something, and they hadn't been to the surgery. Broken ribs. So broken bones in farmers, which they don't bother treating, is quite a common thing. And vets, they have close shaves. One of the vets, whose remained nameless, when he came, and he had a horn in his hand there. And what he said, I just take antibiotics. And I said to him, oh no, you're not. I said, I have to take you to hospital, because if you have a horn there, it affects the palmar fascia, and they need to explore it and clean it out. And anyway, I took him to Spitzer, and that is exactly what they did. And I saw him a month later, and he held his hand up like that with a big scar on his head. And I said, the thing is, I said, if you'd have treated more chimpanzees in your life, you'd have known what to do. Now, I've got Welsh blacks, and they're lovely animals. You might ask me the question, which isn't unreasonable, why do you keep cows when you've been talking about methane and all the harmful effects which these things do? It's a difficult question for me to answer, but all I can say is that they were at one time threatened with, there went far fewer of them around, and but they also there's some evidence to suggest that these farms where they just go and take them over and don't put cattle there has less wildlife in it than farms. And you've got to remember these animals, they're very, they've been around since Roman times. That's my bull. He's gone now, but his name was Hugh, after one of my sons. He weighed over a ton, and he was 8 feet long, and he was very nice. His predecessor wasn't so nice. I won't tell you about what he did. I try not to dehorn the cows because they're outdoors all the time and they're very tough. There you are. There's the bull. You can see the ring in his nose. There's a calf born in the depths of winter. And that's how tough Welsh blacks are. Every man has to have a shed. That was my shed, my family, but I replaced it. Those stones are stones gathered off the land and eventually ended up looking like that. It's built with stone off the land and lime mortar. Lime mortar, incidentally, has less of an environmental impact than sand and cement because you can reuse lime mortar, things with lime mortar, which you can't with sand and cement. And I've got a tractor, as you see. Got a toilet, which is environmentally friendly toilet. These are the cows, and I want to show you the ragwort there. And I want to tell you a little bit about ragwort. You don't need to pull it unless you've got horses, because it's not as poisonous as it is made out. In fact, the Welsh Assembly are doing a review at the moment on the very, and I did first start pulling ragwort, and now I leave it. And if you leave it, do nothing, the cows don't eat it. But more importantly, ragwort supports a lot of insects. 30 insect species and 14 fungi species are entirely reliant on ragwort. And about a third of these insects are scarce or rare. And it's a very important source for the cinnabar moth. That's a weather vane on this thing. And there you can see some swallows. This is the building, and I want this stone to be... Can you get it out of the bag for me, please? Don't drop it on your toes, please. I'm no longer a doctor, so if you break a toe, don't come to me for advice. Pass it along. Have a look at it. If you know what it is, keep it to yourself, please. Don't tell anybody. Thanks. But suffice to say, I've got some pieces of that on the land, and then we'll talk about that afterwards. You see down at the bottom there, that slit. Behind that is a bird box, and that's a kestrel, which was born in that bird box. And the reason it's there is to ring them. So I had 4 years on the trot, I had kestrels, and then crows took over. And the other day, we've seen these kestrels flying around, so fingers crossed that they'll be back there again. There's one of the kestrels, and there's that. You can see that shed was completed in 2010, and that's a picture of the kestrel inside the shed. How long have we got?
Just to get questions in.
Okay, 5 minutes less. Frog spawn or toad, I think it's frog spawn. But the reason I've got that there is that it's, despite being friendly to the environment, we've seen less of that around, and I suspect it's due to climate change. Don't you think, Di? You don't know? Well, it could be. Does anybody know anything about frog spawn or toad spawn here? No?
It could be disease as well.
Is there? Anyway, we did have a lot of frogs, and then we haven't seen them for a few years. But that's... Now, that is a picture. We've got water voles on the land. We've seen them. And you can know that this is frog spawn because if you look at the... what did I say? Sorry. This is reeds. And that's the poo of... sorry. That's water vole poo. which you can tell. And the other way you can know that it's water voles is that when they bite, that's right, the reeds are cut at a 45, like that. Whereas if they were cows, they'd be like that. So that's a good thing. Then we have geese. That's an adder. Adders, again, being reduced. There are fewer of them around because people kill them and all sorts. This is an orchid. And orchids, this is the common orchid, and that's, we have those growing there. This is fairy ring champignon, which is an edible edible toadstool. And yeah, I know that my son and his wife gathered a lot of these, took them to the White Eagle, or they took them home, and I identified them, and I just proved that it was right, because they look like another mushroom called Clitocybe, which is poisonous, so that's one of them, still here. And then we took a box of these stuff to the White Eagle, and they were delighted. They paid 25 quid for a box of these things, you know. And I just to prove that I ate another one raw, just to show.
Have they got psilocybin in them?
Sorry?
Have they got psilocybin in them?
No, well, I haven't seen any magic mushroom, but I'm not an expert on. Well, we've got the jelly fungus, and we've got. Sorry?
They'll have the hippies come in there.
Yes, no, well, yeah, you're right there. Then we've got pheasants there. Now, this is the last bit. If you remember the first slide, one of the things that we've enjoyed doing most, and that is using the land as an educational resource. And we've had school children there. So this is a water pump. The water pump I bought in Morgan Evans, wasn't working, so I got it to work, fixed it, and it's working, and kids love going there and pumping it up and down. The water's not drinkable, by the way. I wouldn't. This is children building an otter holt, and I have seen an otter on the land on one occasion. This is the children there looking at the various grass and counting the different types of grass growing on the land. And I don't know, they're doing something similar there again. And there's my grandchildren. They like using the land as well and pumping water. So what we've seen on the land, I'm almost finished. We've seen hares, we've got lots of rabbits, we've got owls, we've got red squirrels, we've got dragonflies in the ponds, we've got lots of moles, and I've got 4,000 or 5,000 trees. We've got a rare clover, which is only found three other places on Anglesey. Lots of bluebells, and that stone, which we passed around. Has everybody seen it? Is it still going round? Does anybody know? Don't say what that stone is, what it is. No geologists here. No. No? Perhaps we could just bring the stone to the front and I could just hold it up for everybody to see. Right, well, I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's a stone which was mined in Roscollin, and I've got bits of it on the land. And it was, it's called Roscollin marble, and it's not marble. It's a form of serpentine. And the common one is green. And there was a man in 1815, he was a sculptor, and his name was George Bullock. And he was commissioned to make a table for Napoleon when he was in St. Helena in 1815. That stone is also, thanks, is also, so this is it, pink. That stone is also found in various cathedrals in the UK. So in Bristol, Truro, Peterborough, and also in a pub in Liverpool. Has anybody been here to the Philharmonic Hall? Has anybody been to the Philharmonic pub? Who's used the men's toilets in the Philharmonic pub? Now, which of you ladies, put your hands up, have been in the men's toilet? Di, put your hand up. No, she's the only lady who's been in the men's toilet. And are you going to show that for us, Bobby? Oh, is it? Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Oh, no, it's not on. It's not on. No. Well, anyway. Oh, there it is. Ah. Yeah. So that's Roscollin marble. That's the very stone. It's this stone here, and you find it in places. And just to say a little bit about it as well is that the reason that Napoleon had it was during the Napoleonic War. There wasn't marble in the UK, so these cathedrals had to get marble from somewhere. So they used Roscollin marble, and that's it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed for a fascinating tour of the ugly and the good with this richness on your farm. And I should just say, I think I'm right in saying that's the only Grade 1 listed loo in Britain. Is that right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So before we just open it up for questions, I mean, I guess, the big question to ask you is, you've got this amazing 30 acres full of life, full of nature, but it's probably not very commercial. You've got your pension, you can do it. Is that a solution for British farming? Because we need to eat. We need. There are a lot of people on this island. They need food. We're importing a lot of food. If we want self-sufficiency of food,
this is the FUW magazine. There's a lot of
Can you do it organically?
Not without help. Not without help. You can't expect farmers who have got 48 hectares of land, average size 47, 48, 4 times bigger than what I've got. You can't earn a living on that without doing another job these days. I think some of these estates where they've got hundreds of acres, that's a different kettle of fish altogether. But I think that unless we do more to reduce levels of CO2, reduce flooding, improve our habitat for wildlife, unless we do that, it's not going to. Incidentally, organic farmers, only 1 in 20 farmers in the UK are. So I'm a rare.
You're 1 in 20.
I'm 1 in 20.
And what's the difference between what you're doing? You've got your cattle there, and rewilding.
Well, with rewilding, the problem with rewilding is you just let everything run loose. Right. And if you don't have cattle in rewilded areas, the evidence is, and I've got nothing, I was speaking to the gentleman earlier, as a doctor, I'm keen, or was a doctor, I would be keen on evidence. You need an evidence base. Now, I don't have an evidence base. This is just anecdotal. But the anecdotal evidence is that if you just have land and let it run wild, it does not support as much wildlife. Because you've got to remember that the cattle were here thousands of years ago. Those Welsh blacks were around in Roman times and beforehand. So Britain, the UK, it's normal to have animals running around. So
rewilding is too wild.
It doesn't support. The evidence, as far as I know, it doesn't support as much wildlife as if you do have cattle. For what I was saying about the dung and the insects and. Sorry, it just turns into scrub. Yeah.
Now we've got one microphone, I think. So let's open this up, and then we'll pass this one around. There we are.
So it was just a question based on one of your slides there. Obviously the criterion for having an organic farm was obviously no chemicals. But there were two other things on there which I couldn't understand, which was like no water and no electricity. What did that actually mean? It seemed very odd.
No, I'm just sorry to say, no, sorry, I misled you. I've got no mains water on the land.
But is that a criterion?
No, it's not.
Oh,
no,
right,
sorry.
okay.
No. And no electricity isn't a criterion either.
Well, exactly.
I don't need
Very odd, I
electricity.
couldn't understand that.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry,
That's all it
yeah,
was. No.
apologies, yeah.
Just a point about methane. A few 100 million years ago, there was brontosauri wandering around chewing a lot of green stuff, and their farts must have been magnificent. And the Earth survived, so I don't think your cattle are going to cause any problems.
Well, I'm very pleased about that.
When you talk about how much energy is used in producing fertilizer, and there's so much being said about turning from eating meat, fish to vegetables, can we produce that scale of vegetables if you take manure out?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a question I'm honestly, that's a philosophical question as much, because
Well,
it just seems to me
The evidence is that you need 25% more land if you're going to farm organically to produce the same amount as somebody who is not organic, you see. So we've obviously, it's a very difficult question. I don't have the answer for it. I think organic farming is desirable. I think there should be more of it. I think we should use less chemicals. I think we should be using less pesticides and so forth. And it's not going to be like this. It's going to be a gradual thing, isn't it? Because the fact is that these pesticides are becoming less useful. The EU are looking at probably getting rid of glyphosate and some sort, and then encouraging different forms of weeding. I don't know the answer to that.
I mean,
honestly.
I can't see it being possible, so I just
Yeah.
wonder whether I'm
I think
being
it would be
naive.
desirable, but you'd need somebody with more expertise than myself to answer that question, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Because I have tried, no, it's okay. I have tried to let part of our garden go wild, and it was brilliant the first year. But the second year, there is a hierarchy amongst wildflowers, and the wrong ones do dominate
Yes,
and
yeah,
kill off
yeah,
the pollen
Yeah.
producing,
Well,
etc.
to that, since when I had the cows have undoubtedly improved the grass, for instance. There hasn't the yellow rattle, which was a huge problem when we got it, isn't so big a problem now, but it's still there. And I'm not getting rid of it. I'm not pulling it out now like I was. The ragwort. Yeah, I'm not pulling the ragwort out. Sorry. And the land is very rough, but they, you know, it looks healthier, if you like, and there's more wildlife undoubtedly than there was when we got it.
So just since I've got the microphone, one of the things that strikes me, Will, is that a lot of the problems with our food supply is the wastage. We lose a lot of food through wastage, so maybe if we wasted less, we could do more organic farming. Who is next? Charlie.
I was very interested in what you said about the lowlands where no trees, or the trees are missing and all that sort of thing. But I wonder if the council here are aware of this loss of trees, because there's something that is very touchy in Anglesey at the moment, is they want to sell 30 acres of Penrose forest, which they will chop all those 400-year-old oaks.
Yeah.
Do you think they're even aware that we've lost
Well,
those trees elsewhere?
Well, they probably are, but the motivation is wrong, I think. There may well be. The problem with Anglesey Council is they're hard up, like a lot of councils, not just here, but elsewhere. And whether they're selling it to make ends meet, I've no idea. I can't answer that. I think it's a retrograde step. We were there, my wife and I were there yesterday, and it shouldn't be cut down. And did you know that there's an appeal against? Yeah. Yeah, and people want money to go towards it, so we've done a contribution towards that, because you need trees on Anglesey, and I think farmers have, especially big farmers who can afford a farm more, should be planting more trees, without a doubt.
Hi Will, diolch yn fawr iawn am hynna. Hiya. Cancer rates have sort of increased by 50% over the last 40 years. How much of this do you think is related to the foods that we're eating? And do you think eating organically would help? Like, how concerned should we be about my children's diet? And do you think organic eating would help? Well,
you need to listen to that podcast that I gave an advert for. He's no relation of mine or anything either, but he will explain. And I couldn't give you, they think it might cause damage. Certainly in the United States, where they were giving out estrogens, synthetic estrogens in large amounts, they've now had to reduce it. In Europe, they've had to reduce it, and they may be getting rid of glyphosate. I don't know, you see. So, but it's very difficult with these the chemical company. Which one was it? They were sued for £100 million for cancer, weren't they? Which one was it? Monsanto. So they flogged it to Bayer. So Bayer make glyphosate now. But I know Monsanto had to pay out hundreds of millions of pounds. But that's all I know.
Question. Oh, yes.
We're saying how bad fertilisers are, and people are also saying we shouldn't keep cows, but presumably your natural manure is a lot better, and it's part of Earth's natural cycle to deal with it. And of course, methane is an incredibly small percentage of the volume of in the atmosphere.
So it is. You're quite right, but it's more effective as a warmer. But methane is the one gas which they think that they can actually tackle more efficiently, if you like, by altering the way farmers work, possibly because of
But it's such a small percentage that its overall effect is still fairly insignificant, I believe.
Well, it's 30 times more than CO2. It's nitrous oxide, yeah.
Can I just say, it's measured in billions, parts per billion, whereas CO2 is measured in parts per million.
Is it? Right, yes.
So it is a very tiny amount.
Sorry, can we keep to...
Yes, you just took it away.
Well, somebody else has been there.
Yeah, no, point made, yeah.
You've talked about the effect on the planet and the effect on food that we eat, but this is just an observation more than a question, because I looked some years ago at the effect of organophosphates, of which I think glyphosate is one, on the farmers. And it was really a scandal in this country. It's never really been looked at, but a lot of farmers suffered terrible neurological problems from organophosphates. And I think they've now partly been removed from the system. It was sheep dip, absolutely, which I would imagine in Wales was a big issue. And I learned that the suicide rate amongst farmers is one of the highest of any professions. And one of the unlooked at possible causes of that was the effect on farmers of using all these chemicals.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the problem with farming is you're working on your own, for one thing, and the incidence of things like depression is much higher amongst farmers. You're exposed to animals which can kick. I know farmers who've had broken bones I've had one or two close shaves myself, which I'm not going to tell you about, because my wife's here. But it is a dangerous thing, and it's lonely, but we need farmers, and it was a huge problem when you saw farmers and you sympathised with them. When I was working,
I don't know what the answer is, but I'd be really interested to know if the suicide rate amongst organic farmers was lower.
I don't
because
know.
I think that's an unanswered question, the degree to which some of these chemicals have impacted their neurology.
I mean, the problem with farmers is, they're not wealthy, and so you're out in the fields on your own. You may have financial problems, you have problems with your animals, the weather may be awful, and it compounds really into why suicide is higher amongst farmers, or depression is higher amongst them as well, I think.
So, yeah.
Just to clear up, the glyphosate is a very misleading name. There's no phosphorus in glyphosate.
Okay.
And the lady's absolutely right. It's organic phosphorus chemicals, which is used for sheep dippers, are deadly. They're neurotoxins. And if you watch farmers dipping their sheep, they're a little bit sloppy with it. They don't even wear gloves sometimes.
No, you're absolutely right.
And I feel for them because it creeps up on you. And when you've got it, you've got the mental damage. It's too late.
They have a very lackadaisical view of health and safety, and there's nobody there to keep an eye on you either. You see,
and they're tough as well, aren't they?
Yeah. But can I just say about sheep? I wouldn't keep sheep, and the reason I won't keep sheep is that they eat everything, whereas cows don't. They're far more selective.
Well, look, thank you very, very much for talking us through. I mean, most people, when they get to your stage, pick up the newspaper and read that, and take an easy life, and you've not done that.
Well, I sold a cow three months ago, actually.
Okay.
And the reason is I've got a son in Ireland and another one in France, and you can imagine if you have animals, you just can't waltz off, and you've got to be there, because they do get up to tricks like jumping fences and knocking walls down and all sorts of things, and have calves and things like that when you don't expect it.
So slightly quieter.